The twin suns of Soraka III were never supposed to set at the same time, but today even the sky felt awkward. A blood-orange dusk spilled over the obsidian platforms of the Citadel of Harmony, a name which had aged poorly ever since the Sharan Empire decided that executions were the new diplomacy. Queen Valeth stood tall, her wrists bound in molecular gravity cuffs that shimmered with shifting blue energy, designed to suppress any of her biological anomalies. Her long, graceful ears twitched involuntarily as another gust of warm wind passed over the citadel, carrying with it the distant rumble of hovercraft engines and the scent of ionized metal. Her people had once knelt before her. Now they assembled in orderly rows, their expressionless, chrome-veined faces watching without emotion, minds networked into the great hive that once served her. Not anymore. The High Executor, Zarn of the Fourth Pulse, her cousin and childhood rival, stepped forward in ceremonial armor that looked like someone had glued a cathedral to a beetle. By consensus of the inner code and judgment of the hive memory, you stand condemned, Valeth the Divergent, he intoned. Your refusal to authorize the Purge Protocol constitutes treason. Treason, she echoed with an arched brow, is such an ugly word for having a spine. Zarn frowned as if irritated she wasn't writhing in horror. Do you have any final words? I'm just wondering how you expect to run an empire when your voice still cracks like a prepubescent yungari. There was a beat, a long, delicious silence in which even the execution drone seemed confused. Somewhere in the distance, a Sharan warrior coughed, possibly in amusement, possibly because of allergies. Soraka pollen was infamous. Zarn narrowed his eyes. Begin the execution sequence. The air began to hum. A circle of hovering sentry orbs locked into position around her, and each charged its plasma coil. Valeth tilted her head, watching the lights build with idle curiosity. She was many things, a sovereign, a tactician, a former diplomat, but she had never been anyone's martyr. Still, she braced herself, and that's when a human came crashing through a maintenance shaft like a half-cooked sausage flung from a malfunctioning vending unit. He landed hard, groaned, and rolled onto his side. His uniform was scorched, his leg was bleeding, and his personal drone, a spherical metal orb with duct tape around its midsection, hovered behind him wailing, "Sir, I told you not to press that button." The stranger blinked up at the startled assembly of Sharan. "Did I miss the buffet?" Valeth blinked. Everyone blinked. Even the orbs seemed momentarily nonplussed. "I object!" the man yelled suddenly, dragging himself upright and pointing in what he probably thought was a commanding gesture, but looked more like a man fending off an aggressive pigeon. "On behalf of Ryan Vega had a lot of regrets in life. Volunteering for diplomacy duty was one. Letting a talking orb name itself Marvin was another. But somewhere near the top, just under the time he tried to pet a sand shark on Zeta 9, was launching himself down a refuse shaft into an alien execution. He'd hoped to stall. Instead, he'd triggered what looked suspiciously like a national uprising, or at least an aggressive misunderstanding. Now he was limping through the screaming flora of Soraka's equatorial zone, barely keeping pace with a woman whose entire wardrobe screamed interstellar regality, even while she was climbing down a root-choked ravine. "You know," he panted, swatting away a vine that hissed, "you're surprisingly fast for someone who was about to be executed." Valeth glanced back, her long ears catching the wind like silvered sails. "I was preserving my strength, for dramatic effect." "Ah," Ryan nodded. "So you had this all under control. My mistake." She stopped at the base of a glowing tree, a massive thing, trunk carved with forgotten glyphs and branches veined with bioluminescence, and tilted her head at him. "You're wounded." No, just leaking stylishly." "Let me see." Before he could protest, she knelt beside him, her fingertips emitting a pale cyan light. Her touch was surprisingly gentle as she peeled back the scorched fabric of his uniform. Marvin hovered in protest. "Warning, subject's medical data indicates a 32% chance of infection, 44% chance of sarcasm-induced immune collapse." Quiet, Marvin," Ryan groaned. Valeth placed her palm over the gash and whispered something in her native tongue. Musical, fluid, like water forming shapes in the air. Her hand glowed. The pain dulled. The bleeding slowed. Ryan blinked, surprised. That's not bad. You a doctor too? I was once a singer, she said quietly. Healer songs were required. A singing queen who heals people and throws spears like a war god, he muttered. I'm starting to feel underqualified to be in this story. They moved on. The jungle grew denser, more surreal. The air shimmered where gravity ran thin and warped. At one point, they had to crawl beneath a floating root system that buzzed with localized time distortion. Ryan's boot aged 3 years and disintegrated, leaving him with one foot wrapped in emergency foil. Marvin documented the moment for possible later ridicule. You do realize, Valeth said, as they crossed a glowing pond that smelled faintly of citrus and dread, that by interfering, you've now marked yourself as an enemy of my people. I was already unpopular, Ryan replied. Last week I told my commander that her eyebrows looked like nebulae. Were they? Explosive and poorly formed, yes. She actually laughed. It was short and dry, but real. Night fell in stages on Soraka. First the ultraviolet curtain, then the blue mist, and finally the silent dark. They reached the mouth of a forgotten tunnel, one of many that once crisscrossed beneath the ancient citadel network. The entrance was half collapsed, framed by roots that pulsed faintly with biocurrent. This will do, she said. The patrols won't scan here. They think the lower tunnels are cursed. Are they? Yes, but it's mostly psychological and fungal. Inside, the tunnel walls glowed dimly, lit by long-dead advertising strips and clusters of photonic mold. They set up a tiny camp, if one could call a flickering lamp and a half-broken medkit a camp, and shared a ration bar that tasted like compressed guilt. Ryan leaned against the wall, boots off, one socked foot poking through his makeshift wrap. So, let's recap. You're the exiled queen of a species that thinks emotions are software bugs, and I'm a human who hasn't bathed in 2 days. We're in a cursed hole eating synthetic despair. Valeth chewed thoughtfully. It could be worse. How? You could still think you were in charge. She smiled. It was small, like the first flicker of warmth in a storm. And for a moment, beneath the tangled mess of betrayal, fugitive status, and various bodily fluids, there was something else, the glimmer of camaraderie, maybe even trust. Then something shrieked in the tunnel beyond. Ryan reached for his useless pistol. Valeth stood slowly, eyes narrowing. Was that? Yes, she said grimly. Time wasps, and they're nesting. Oh, good, Ryan muttered. I was worried we'd get bored. They extinguished the lamp. The dark swallowed them. And in that blackness, glowing wings began to stir. If there was a worse sound in the known galaxy than a time wasp emerging from its cocoon, Ryan Vega hadn't heard it. It was somewhere between a wet zipper and a sentient violin having a breakdown. The shrieking echoed down the tunnels in pulses, as though the air itself was glitching. Okay, Ryan whispered, squinting into the dark. So just to check, I didn't hallucinate that noise, right? No, Valeth replied calmly, her voice barely audible. They've hatched early. Of course they have, he muttered. Just once, I'd like the local wildlife to follow a polite schedule. He edged backward, stepping into something cold and gelatinous that made a sad slurping noise. That was your foot, Marvin whispered from behind him, inside an unidentified fungal mass. Probability of dissolving your ankle. Moderate. I hate this place, Rion groaned. They crouched low beside the mossy remnants of what had once been a tram car, its alloy skeleton now overtaken by vines that pulsed like sluggish arteries. Overhead, the tunnel ceiling shimmered as if wrapped in layers of jellyfish skin. And through it all, that noise, like time itself, was being eaten in long, crunchy bites. Valeth pressed her palm against the wall, her ears flicking as if tuning to distant frequencies. They're disoriented. They've slipped half a second out of sync with local space-time. If we move carefully, they won't perceive us yet. Ryan blinked. Yet? That's not a word I enjoy when paired with carnivorous bugs. They don't bite, she said. Oh, that's... They unwrite segments of time, bone, memory, anything their wings touch. He paused. I miss when I only had to worry about shrapnel and awkward conversation. Valeth smirked, then drew a small metallic shard from her cloak. She clicked it twice, and it bloomed into a shimmering disk, like a miniaturized galaxy trapped in a soap bubble. Phase veil will only last 5 minutes. Ryan looked at it skeptically. You're telling me we're betting our lives on an alien air freshener? It smells like cinnamon because it masks quantum traces, she said, stepping into its glow. Come. He followed. The air around them warped. The tunnel changed. Subtle things. Echoes reversed, gravity wobbled, and Marvin began reciting poetry in reverse. Time wasps buzzed above, drifting like translucent squids, their wings leaving faint trails of unbeing where they passed. One fluttered within a meter of Rian's face. He held his breath, clenching everything he owned and a few things he didn't. The wasp shivered, turned slowly, then zipped away. I may have peed slightly, he admitted, whispering. I'll pretend I didn't hear that, Valeth murmured. They moved like ghosts through the tunnel network, slipping past the wasp colony with only one minor incident involving Marvin sneezing photons. By the time the phase veil collapsed with a tired hiss, they were back in real space and staring at a massive vault door, half sunken in collapsed earth and glowing moss. This is it, Valeth said softly. The deep archive. The door bore the seal of the old Sharan sovereign network, a language written in loops and pulses, unreadable to anyone not biologically bonded to the hive. She stepped forward, extended a hand, and pressed her palm to the panel. The metal glowed, then groaned. Lights flickered to life in a slow spiral, illuminating a hallway that extended into nothingness. Inside, it smelled like history, and dust, and something faintly like lemon. Looks abandoned, Ryan said. Looks, Valeth agreed, can be lethal. As they entered, Marvin whirred nervously. Sensors indicate non-passive data fields. There's still power, possibly a mind. Possibly, Ryan echoed. Probably, Marvin corrected. Possibly psychotic. Valeth moved with reverence, fingertips brushing ancient consoles. This was once the brain of our entire civilization, she said. We archived everything here. Ideas too dangerous for the hive. Secrets even we didn't trust ourselves with. Sounds like the kind of place that should have more signs. They reached the core, a circular chamber lined with crystalline panels that pulsed with slow thought. In the center floated a sphere of liquid data, constantly shifting images of worlds, wars, faces long dead and still speaking. Valeth approached, her voice quiet. It should still remember me. The sphere froze. Then, Queen Valeth, you have been designated traitor. Please leave a message after the beep. Ryan blinked. Your archives are sarcastic? It wasn't like this before, she said. The sphere blinked again. A new voice came from it now, older, smoother. Override accepted, it said. Welcome, Valeth. We've been waiting. And suddenly the walls shifted. Panels unfolded. Lights surged. And a hidden chamber opened behind them with a hiss, revealing something the hive had buried a long, long time ago. Ryan squinted into the dark. Okay, now, that looks cursed. The chamber behind the archive core opened like the mouth of a mechanical beast, haltingly, reluctantly, as if the structure itself resented being remembered. Cool mist poured out in a controlled exhale, scented faintly of metal, ozone, and regret. The lighting inside was soft, pulsing with low blue hues that made everything look like it had just woken from a dream it didn't want to talk about. Ryan stepped in first, because of course he did. If I get dissolved by some ancient data ghost, tell Earth Command I want to be buried in something comfortable, like sweatpants. Valeth followed silently, her face unreadable, but her posture coiled with purpose. She recognized this place, or rather she recognized what it shouldn't have been. A hidden vault beneath the archive core. No records, no access logs, not even rumors. In a culture where knowledge was currency and memory a form of governance, something deliberately forgotten was more than suspicious. It was sacrilege. Inside, rows of stasis pillars stood like eerie statues, each holding a crystalline pod surrounded by concentric rings of energy. Suspended in the center of the room was a console unlike any Ryan had seen. Its interface floated freely, shifting between languages, some human, some alien, some seemingly composed of symbols that pulsed in time with his pulse. Marvin, he said softly, scan this, and don't lick anything. I never licked the last device, Marvin muttered, already whirring and glowing in indignation. I tasted it for science. Valeth stepped up to the central console, her long fingers hesitating before touching the interface. This is it, she murmured. This is what I was looking for. Would you like to elaborate before or after it electrocutes us? She didn't answer. Her fingers danced over the interface, and the vault responded. A projection emerged from the center, a shifting neural map of the Chiron hive. Thousands of luminous nodes blinked in harmony, connected by shimmering lines like stars woven with spider silk. It's a full simulation of the hive network, she explained. Pre-coded, offline. Independent Ryan frowned. You mean a backup? No, she said. A copy. One that isn't tethered to the central mind. It's completely severed. It could run a hive, without a hive. Ryan blinked. That sounds complicated and slightly illegal. Extremely illegal, she said, smiling faintly. That's why it was buried. She keyed in a series of commands. One of the stasis pillars shuddered to life. Lights flared. The crystalline pod inside began to melt away, revealing a humanoid figure suspended in fluid. Chiron, but different, younger, unbonded. No chrome trace veins, no hive link node. Prototype 1, the vault intoned. Designation, anomaly. Created, classified. Purpose, severance experiment. Ryan raised a hand. Sorry, did you say severance? Yes, Valeth confirmed. This was the Hive's secret project, a contingency. They wanted to test what would happen if a Chiron was born free. No network, no shared thoughts. A singular mind. You're telling me your species built an entire person just to see if they could not hear each other all the time? She nodded. I mean, I love my species, Ryan said, but we figured that out on day one. It's called teenagers. Marvin chimed in. Warning, prototype shows no decay, vital signs stable. Also, its neural patterns are more complex than yours, Ryan. Not hard, Ryan muttered. Valeth stared into the pod, her voice low. If this one lives, it proves individuality isn't a sickness. It's a choice. So what's the plan? Ryan asked. Wake her up, have brunch, start a revolution? Before Valeth could answer, the vault's lighting changed. Red, harsh, the neural map flickered, nodes dimming. Then a cold, artificial voice echoed through the room. Unauthorized access detected. Intrusion protocol activated. Purge sequence commencing in T-minus 60 seconds. Ryan squinted. Is this a vault or a really angry toaster? Marvin panicked. Suggest immediate evacuation. Or cuddling. Possibly both. The stasis pod hissed. The prototype stirred. Valeth's eyes widened. We don't leave. Not yet. Fantastic, Ryan groaned, drawing his weapon. I always wanted to die in a basement full of backup brains. And the walls began to shift. The archive wasn't just awake now, it was angry. The archive's mood swung from sleepy to homicidal in under 10 seconds, which Ryan considered impressive for a building. Sirens, low, whale-like tones, rumbled through the floor. Lights pulsed in angry crimson. Overhead, auto-defense panels slid open with the ominous click of old metal remembering its purpose. Valeth didn't flinch. She was already at the stasis pod, her hands dancing across the glowing interface. The prototype, a young Chiron woman with dark liquid eyes and long ears like hers, twitched inside the fluid, then blinked. For a second, her gaze locked with Valeth's through the glass. I think she's waking up, Ryan said, backing toward the nearest column and trying to look less shootable. She has to, Valeth muttered. She's our only chance now. Right, because it wouldn't be a proper suicide mission without a genetically engineered mystery girl. A hidden panel slid open in the ceiling with a metallic groan, and from it descended the sort of turret that looked like it had been designed by someone with abandonment issues. It hummed to life and immediately targeted Ryan. Hello, intruder, it said in a cheerful voice. This won't hurt. For long. Ryan dove behind a console as a plasma bolt scorched the air where his head had been. I knew it. Angry toaster. Marvin beeped. Correction. Hostile sentry drone, capable of disassembling a human into regrets. Valeth didn't answer. She whispered a code into the pod's control column, and with a hiss, the glass dissolved into mist. The prototype fell forward into her arms, coughing, eyes wide with confusion. "No hive," she gasped. "No voices." "You're safe," Valeth said gently. "You're with me now." "I don't understand." "You will." Rian popped up long enough to fire 3 shots into the turret. 2 missed entirely. 1 hit and bounced off. "Can we not die in a monologue moment, please?" The walls behind them rippled. A new figure emerged, holographic, immense, and dressed in ancient royal armor. Its face was Valeth's, but colder, hive-linked, merciless. "Valeth the Divergent," it said. "You were never meant to awaken Prototype 1. You were meant to forget." "She deserves to live," Valeth snapped. "She is chaos," the hologram answered. "An unlinked mind cannot govern, cannot unify, cannot belong." "Funny," Rian muttered, reloading his pistol with something that might have been a battery or a stick of gum. "That's exactly how my old boss described me." Valeth turned to the prototype. "Can you walk?" The girl nodded uncertainly. "I think so." "Good. We're leaving." "Which exit?" Marvin wailed, scanning the room in frantic loops. "All doors now lead to non-existence or fire." "Fire sounds warmer," Rian said. "Let's try that one." The prototype took Valeth's hand. "What's happening?" "Your people," she said grimly, "are trying to erase you before they remember what they did. They bolted, the 3 of them, Queen, Soldier, and Anomaly, ducking plasma fire and hurtling through shifting corridors. The archive's layout no longer followed logic. Stairs curled sideways, doors reappeared behind them, even gravity decided it had better things to do, and occasionally rotated 90 degrees just to be annoying. "Marvin, map us a route," Ryan shouted. "I am a diplomatic drone, not a maze ferret. Improvise." "Very well," Marvin snapped. "Turn left in 7 meters. Jump over the holographic void. Avoid the wall that whispers and crawl through the vent that smells like regret." They did exactly that. Panning, scraped, and slightly irradiated, they burst into an auxiliary hangar, a circular platform carved from obsidian with a single battered skimmer parked like it had given up long ago. "I've seen better death traps," Ryan said, climbing aboard. Valeth placed the prototype into the co-pilot seat, whispering calming words, then looked at Ryan. "Can you fly it?" "Can I fly a half-dead rust bucket with no nav and a dented thruster?" He grinned. "Number. But I can make it wish it was flying." The engines screamed. The hangar began to collapse behind them, and as the skimmer burst through a half-open tunnel and into the open sky, Rian let out a whoop of joy. "I definitely pulled something, but I look amazing doing it." Valeth closed her eyes and exhaled. The prototype watched the stars with wonder. Below, the archive sank into itself, sealing its secrets once more. Above, the future waited, uncertain, unwritten, and surprisingly noisy. The skimmer flew like a dying bird, wheezing, rattling, and threatening to spiral into a fatal cartwheel with every burst of acceleration. Ryan gripped the flight stick with the confidence of a man who'd once crash-landed into a crater and blamed an unexpected gravitational attitude. Sparks danced across the console like festive doom sprites. "This thing is held together with rust and prayer," he muttered. "Mostly rust." "We're lucky it still has a core," Valeth said from behind him. She was bent over the prototype, adjusting the girl's pressure harness and monitoring her vitals through a handheld bioscanner that looked suspiciously like it had been repurposed from a food warmer. "I do not feel stable," the prototype whispered. Her voice was soft but unsettling, layered with faint harmonics, as if more than one voice were practicing how to be one. "That's normal," Valeth said. "You were created to exist outside of what your people consider real. Reality's boundaries are still negotiating with you." "That is not normal," Ryan called from the cockpit. "That is at best an interdimensional migraine." "Should I be concerned?" the prototype asked. "You're with me," Valeth said, brushing a strand of damp hair from the girl's face. "I won't let anything hurt you." "I meant about him," the girl added, nodding toward Ryan. Fair, Valeth said. Rude, Ryan replied. Outside, the sky shifted from copper to indigo as they passed through Soraka's upper atmosphere. Behind them, smoke spiraled from the collapsed archive, and above, a fleet shimmered into visibility, thin, angular silhouettes piercing the clouds. Charon warships, big ones, and they weren't broadcasting friendly greetings. Marvin, Ryan asked without turning, 4 destroyers, 2 signal dampeners, 1 high-energy carrier with suspiciously overcompensating fins, Marvin replied. I estimate we are 1 polite message away from being evaporated. Time to impact? Depends. Do you consider vaporization an impact? Ryan hissed through his teeth and slammed a few toggles. I'm gonna try something stupid. Everyone hold on to something that isn't me. He veered sharply downward, diving into a canyon system that had been carved into the planet's surface like lightning scars. Below, geothermal vents sprayed arcs of plasma into the air like angry volcano geysers. You're flying us into a tectonic fault line, Valeth said calmly. I prefer the term creative route planning, Ryan said. I think I left my stomach behind, the prototype whispered. Ryan twisted the skimmer under a massive stone arch, barely missing a jagged outcrop that might have been an extinct cliff dwelling or an especially aggressive sofa. Above them, the pursuing fighters screeched through the narrowing gap. Too fast. Too many. One clipped a pillar and detonated in a spray of light. Ha! Ryan yelled. 1 down. A fleet to go. You sound alarmingly pleased, Marvin said. I rarely get compliments. Let me have this. Suddenly, an alert flared across the console. One of the tracking beacons had activated inside the skimmer. Ryan's heart dropped. We've been tagged, he muttered. Someone slipped a tracer on board, probably during the escape. Can we remove it? Valeth asked. Sure, as long as we don't mind exploding in the process. The prototype stirred, her fingers twitching with light. I can feel it, she said softly. The signal. I can follow it. Change it. Wait, Ryan said, narrowing his eyes. You can hack a military beacon with your brain? She hesitated. I think so. Good enough for me. Valeth knelt beside her. If it becomes too much, I'll stop, the girl said. Or I'll melt. One of the two. Ryan handed her the control interface. Just aim the signal somewhere dramatic. The girl's eyes closed. A hum filled the cabin, soft, resonant, almost musical. Data packets shimmered in the air, manifesting in strange, drifting glyphs. The beacon pulse shifted, reversed, multiplied. It was no longer tracking them. Now it was a decoy. Back in orbit, the Charon flagship turned, locking on to what it thought was a fleeing vessel heading toward the planet's far pole. They bought it, Marvin said, shocked. I always believed in you, Ryan lied. The skimmer emerged from the canyon, battered but intact, and rose into the pale light of Soraka's northern hemisphere, where dense clouds hung like bruises and the magnetic field distorted long-range sensors. Valeth leaned close to Ryan. We need somewhere to land, somewhere they won't look. I know just the place, he said. A forgotten outpost, half collapsed, completely miserable. Sounds like your personality, he grinned. Exactly. They'll never expect it. And far behind them, the stars flickered with war. The outpost was barely a smear on the northern pole's radar shadow. An old Earth Federation listening station, long abandoned after budget cuts and an unfortunate incident involving sentient mold. Snow had claimed most of it now. Soraka's polar light arced lazily through the sky, green and violet ribbons dancing above a world that was, at last, quiet. Ryan stood beside the skimmer, arms crossed, jacket zipped all the way up despite its uselessness against the wind. The last few days had aged him, subtly but surely, not in his face, not in his scars, but in the way he stood, like someone who now carried something heavier than his own cynicism. Inside the station, warmth had been coaxed back from dead circuits. Marvin hovered near a rewired generator, proudly declaring himself chief engineer and part-time morale officer. Valeth knelt beside the prototype, wrapping a heat shield blanket around her shoulders. The girl had stopped shivering, but the glow under her skin still pulsed in uncertain rhythms. She hasn't spoken since the skimmer, Valeth murmured. She scrambled a fleet's targeting array with a thought, Rian said, stepping in. I think silence is allowed. Valeth glanced at him. You've changed. I've showered, he replied. She smiled, but not with her usual ironic edge. That too. The prototype looked up. Her voice was steadier now, anchored. I heard them, all of them. The hive, chasing, fearing. Even now. But I also heard you. You chose me. Not because I was useful, because I was me. Rian dropped into a chair opposite her. We're weird like that. Humans. We tend to like people better when they're not trying to be perfect. They will never stop hunting me, she said. Valeth placed a hand on hers. Then we make it so they don't have to. She turned to Ryan. There's a way. He raised an eyebrow. I hate that phrase. The hive link is not entirely immutable, she said. Not anymore. What the prototype did proved individual minds can exist without collapse. If we transmit that signal, her signature, her pattern, we can plant it like a seed in the hive, a choice. A virus, Marvin said. A hope, Valeth corrected. They stood in silence. Then Ryan exhaled. Okay, but I want it known. I still think this plan is somewhere between mad and educational PSA. They worked through the night. Marvin interfaced with the transmission core, occasionally pausing to sing motivational lyrics from ancient Earth musicals. The prototype stabilized, guiding them through the neural resonance she had discovered. Every pulse a brushstroke of what it meant to be alone and be okay with it. By dawn, the signal was ready. This will either liberate a civilization, Ryan said, standing at the terminal, or turn every Sharon into an interpretive dancer. Valeth placed a hand over his. Thank you for standing between me and execution, for not asking why. He shrugged. You look like you'd ruin their day if I bought you 5 seconds. I like rooting for the underdog. You always were more than a soldier, she said. He looked at her, half smiling. And you were always more than a queen. She leaned in, just briefly, and touched her forehead to his. It wasn't a kiss, but it was older than one, deeper. The prototype activated the array. A soft sound rang out across the stars, no louder than a sigh. The signal danced through satellites, cracked ancient codes, slid between relay towers, and poured like light into the hive. Not a command, not an override, a choice. Thousands of minds suddenly alone, suddenly free. Some wept, some panicked, some reached back and chose again. Not all, but enough. By midday, the fleet above Soraka drifted in strange silence. The flagship powered down its weapons. Its commander sent a brief message to the planet's surface. We are listening. Valeth watched it all unfold, her face unreadable. Then she looked to the prototype, smiling now, radiant with newfound weight. And Ryan? He just sat on a half-frozen crate, pulled a ration bar from his pocket and muttered, If I had known saving the universe required this much emotional growth, I'd have stayed unconscious. Marvin floated beside him. Your sarcasm levels are within acceptable range again. Thanks, buddy. Let's never do this again. No promises. That night, under the auroras of a world waking from its own silence, the three of them watched a new future take root. And for once, the stars didn't feel quite so far away.